Picture this. It's your coworker's birthday. Someone wheeled in a Costco sheet cake at 2 p.m. You weren't hungry. You'd eaten lunch an hour ago. You had no plan to have any. And then someone put a plate in front of you. And 30 seconds later, the plate is empty and you're eyeing the second slice like it owes you money. You didn't plan that. You didn't decide that. Something deeper than a decision happened, and that thing has been happening to human beings for 200,000 years before you were born. Here's the part that's going to mess with you a little. That compulsion. The one that made you eat past full, past satisfied, past the point where the cake even tasted good. That isn't a failure of willpower. It isn't a character flaw. It's your nervous system running a survival program so old it predates the concept of birthday cake by roughly 200,000 years. Stick around, because by the end of this video you're going to understand why the words "it's free" are basically a biological override switch, and why that's both completely insane and entirely rational at the same time. Let's go back. Way back, not to your childhood kitchen, not even to ancient Rome, back to a world where there was no refrigerator, no Costco, no guaranteed meal tomorrow. You are a human being standing somewhere in East Africa approximately 100,000 years ago. You've been moving most of the day. Your group, maybe 20, maybe 30 people, brought down a large animal this morning, an antelope, a wildebeest. The details depend on which researcher you ask and which fossilized campsite they're standing next to when they say it. But here's what we know. The kill is real. The meat is in front of you. And here's the thing about meat. In a world without refrigeration, without salt, without any preservation method more sophisticated than smoke and optimism, it doesn't last. Within a day, maybe two, especially in the African heat, that protein is gone, rotted, stolen by scavengers, or taken by someone else in the group who got there first. Your body, through roughly 2 million years of selection pressure, has learned exactly one thing about this situation with absolute crystalline clarity. Eat now. Eat as much as you can hold. Because the next kill might be tomorrow. It might be 3 days from now. It might be a week. You have no way to know. The fridge doesn't exist. The concept of a guaranteed next meal does not exist in any form that your nervous system would recognize. So what does your nervous system do? It stops listening to fullness. Or more precisely, it stops listening to it immediately. Here's the mechanism, and once you understand it, it becomes a kind of beautiful biological irony. Your body has a hormone called leptin. Leptin is your satiety signal. It's the chemical messenger that's supposed to tell your brain, okay, we've taken on enough fuel, you can stop. And it works. It's real. The problem is that leptin operates on a delay. Researchers studying energy homeostasis have documented this clearly. Leptin doesn't spike the moment food hits your stomach. It rises gradually as your body processes what you've eaten, and the lag between when you're physically full and when your brain actually receives that message runs roughly 15 to 20 minutes. This isn't a bug in the system. In the ancestral environment, by the time your brain registered fullness, the kill was still right there. The delay kept you eating longer. More calories loaded before the stop signal arrived. If you're trying to survive a famine that starts in 3 days, that 15 to 20 minute lag is an enormous advantage. If you're trying to not have a fourth slice of sheet cake at a birthday party, that lag is an existential problem. And layered on top of the leptin delay is something even older and more powerful. Your brain's reward circuitry for calorie-dense food. Every time you eat something high in fat, sugar, or caloric density, things that were genuinely rare and precious in the ancestral environment, your brain releases dopamine. Not just a pleasant sensation, a motivational signal, a do more of this right now command from your reward system. The same circuit that drives you toward warmth and connection and shelter. Your brain treats calorie-dense food the way a slot machine treats a jackpot. There's a pull. There's a don't stop message firing underneath the awareness. More. Keep going. You might not get another shot at this. And then there's the third layer, the one most people never hear about. And it's the one that explains why free, specifically, is the trigger. Your brain doesn't just track how much food you're eating. At a neurological level, it's constantly computing the economics of food. Is this scarce or abundant? Is obtaining it costing me energy? Or is it just appearing in front of me? And when food is free, when it costs you nothing, no hunt, no labor, no expenditure of any kind, your brain reads that as a very specific environmental signal. It reads it as feast conditions, as genuine surplus, as a rare and precious moment of abundance in what your nervous system deep down still models as a fundamentally scarce world. And in a feast, you don't portion control. You don't save room for later. In a feast, you load up, because this is exactly the moment your ancestors evolved to exploit with maximum efficiency. You want to feel less alone in this? Wolves, A wolf, after a successful hunt, can eat up to 20 pounds of meat in a single sitting. 20 pounds. That's roughly the weight of a car tire. That is not a mistake. That is not compulsive disorder. That is a biological strategy. Wolves have long, unpredictable gaps between kills. When the kill arrives, they eat until they physically cannot eat more, because their bodies have been calibrated by millions of years of selection to store the caloric surplus as fast as possible before the surplus disappears. The kill is now. The hunger is later. Loading up is correct. Bears do something even more dramatic. In the weeks before hibernation, a grizzly enters a physiological state called hyperphagia, which is a clinical term for what is essentially biologically mandated compulsive eating. A bear in hyperphagia will consume somewhere between 15 and 20,000 calories in a single day, spending as much as 22 hours eating. That's roughly 8 to 10 times what an average adult human eats in a day. Their bodies are suppressing satiety signals almost entirely because winter is real, the food is here now, and this window will close. There's no moral failure happening. The bear isn't weak. The bear is executing a survival algorithm so well-tuned it has barely needed to change in millions of years. And here's the detail that makes the bear analogy sharper than it first appears. Bears have an off switch. When the season turns and the den calls, hyperphagia stops. The biological instruction to gorge switches off because the window has closed. The problem for us is that the equivalent signal, the seasonal shift that tells the nervous system the feast is over, doesn't exist in a world where the supermarket never closes. The feast that was supposed to be temporary has become permanent, and the off switch never gets thrown. Here's what matters. Neither the wolf nor the bear is making a bad decision. They're running a program that has kept their entire lineage alive through every resource crunch their species ever faced. And when you eat a third piece of free pizza at the office lunch you weren't even hungry for, evolutionarily speaking, you are running the same program. You are the bear. The conference room is the meadow. The pizza is the salmon. And your nervous system, which has received no update informing it that Domino's delivers on Wednesdays regardless of season, is performing exactly as designed. So here's the reversal. The thing that actually reframes the whole picture. Overeating when food is free is not your body failing. It is your body succeeding at exactly the survival task it was built to solve. Your brain is executing a feast protocol that got your entire genetic lineage through every famine, every drought, every long cold stretch without a kill that any of your ancestors ever survived. The protocol works. The protocol is not broken. The protocol simply has no idea that the feast is never going to end. Now, before you close the tab in relief and go find more birthday cake, let's be fair to the skeptic in the room, because there's a real objection here that deserves more than a wave of the hand. You might be thinking, okay, but some people stop at a buffet. I have friends who look at the cake and don't want it. Willpower is real. Self-control is real. Why doesn't everyone overeat if this is just hardwired evolutionary programming? That's actually a fair challenge, and the honest answer is, it's both. And the ratio is messier than any single explanation can hold. Yes, there is genuine individual variation in leptin sensitivity. Research into the genetics of energy homeostasis has shown that variation in leptin receptor genes can meaningfully affect how quickly and clearly a given person registers satiety. Some people's brains get the full message faster and more forcefully than others. That variation is real, and it does create a hardware advantage for some people at the appetizer table. And here's a scientific wrinkle that most conversations about this completely miss. John Speakman, a biologist at the University of Aberdeen, has proposed what he calls the drifty gene hypothesis. The idea that the genes predisposing us to store excess calories weren't actively selected for during famine cycles at all. They simply drifted into the population through random genetic variation once our ancestors stopped being heavily predated, roughly 2 million years ago. Once that predation pressure lifted, there was no longer a hard evolutionary ceiling on body fat, and the upper limit just wandered upward over generations, not a finely honed survival tool shaped by famine, a glitch that nobody came to fix. Speakman and his colleagues tested this directly, scanning 115 obesity-linked genes, and found no more signatures of active selection than in random control genes. The thrifty gene story, the one most evolutionary psychology videos repeat as settled, may be incomplete at best and wrong at worst. But here's the thing the objection quietly ignores. Willpower isn't free either. Willpower is a cognitive resource. It depletes under stress, under sleep deprivation, under social performance pressure, under distraction. And those happen to be exactly the conditions most common at the specific events where free food reliably appears. The work holiday party, the conference-catered lunch, the wedding reception you've been anxious about for 3 weeks. You didn't sleep enough. You're socially on. You're slightly dysregulated in ways you might not even notice. And someone just placed a plate of engineered dopamine triggers directly in front of you. Individual variation is real. But the baseline feast compulsion is species-wide, and the conditions under which free food appears in modern social life are precisely the conditions under which that compulsion is hardest to override. The hardware advantage some people have doesn't eliminate the compulsion, it just adjusts the threshold. Let's stack the actual evidence because this goes several layers deeper than just hormones. A CDC analysis of American working adults found that roughly 1 in 4 workers gets food at work on a given week, and 71% of those calories came from food that cost them nothing, not bought at the cafeteria, not brought from home, just there, just free. Over 1,000 extra calories a week per person from sources that required zero financial transaction to acquire. The free food at work isn't a minor dietary footnote. It's a structural feature of the modern American diet. Footnote. Field studies of the Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer populations studied in real time, found that when foragers encountered food on the trail, individual intake could reach extraordinary heights in a single trip. One researcher documented an individual consuming over 22,000 calories in a single foraging foray. The median was far lower, but the ceiling is the point. The behavioral template is opportunistic gorging when food is present and conservation when it isn't. That template is still running in you, unchanged, every time someone rolls in a catered lunch. And then there's the modern layer, which may be the most important one, and which adds a dimension to this that the ancestral story alone can't fully explain. The food that is most often free, the cake, the chips, the pizza, the pastries, the candy bowl on the receptionist's desk, is not accidentally appealing. It has been engineered. The psychophysicist Howard Moskowitz, working originally for the U.S. Army in the 1970s on why soldiers kept discarding their field rations, developed what the food industry came to call the bliss point, the precise ratio of fat, sugar, salt, and texture that maximizes the pleasure response while suppressing the signals that would ordinarily tell you to stop. But here's what the bliss point story usually leaves out, and what makes it genuinely alarming when you add the research. In 2019, Kevin Hall and colleagues at the National Institutes of Health ran the first randomized controlled trial ever designed to test whether ultra-processed food actually causes overeating. They housed 20 adults in a clinical setting for 4 weeks, fed them either ultra-processed or minimally processed diets, matched for presented calories, sugar, fat, and fiber, and let them eat as much or as little as they wanted. People on the ultra-processed diet consumed an average of 500 extra calories per day. They gained nearly a pound. The people eating minimally processed food lost nearly the same amount. Here's the part that should stop you cold. When Hall's team asked both groups how much they enjoyed the food, there was no significant difference. The ultra-processed group wasn't eating more because it tasted better. They were eating more because they were eating faster. Ultra-processed food was consumed at 17 calories per minute, meaningfully faster than the unprocessed food. The plate was empty before the 15 to 20 minute satiety window could even begin to close. Your body's own stop signal simply didn't have time to arrive. The engineered food isn't just triggering the feast response. It has been optimized through decades of palatability research to slip through the satiety window before it can shut. Your ancestral feast was an animal carcass, protein, fat, and a tremendous amount of chewing. Tough fibers, dense tissue. It took time. It produced fullness before you could eat the whole thing by yourself. Your modern feast is a chip that dissolves in your mouth in 45 seconds with zero structural resistance, engineered to disappear before satiety can even begin to form, designed to remove every friction point that ancestral food naturally provided. The mismatch isn't just environmental, it's an arms race, and your ancient brain is losing it without even knowing there's a fight. But the deepest trigger, the one underneath all the biology, the thing that throws the first switch in the whole cascade, isn't hunger. It isn't even taste. It's a single word. Free. Not cheap. Not discounted. Free. The word free operates differently in your nervous system than any other price signal, and this has been documented in behavioral economics in ways that are almost uncomfortable to think about. Christina Champagnier, Nina Mazar, and Dan Ariely ran a series of real purchase experiments at MIT and found something striking. When the price of a piece of chocolate dropped from 1 cent to 0, demand didn't just increase, it leapt. From roughly 27% of people choosing it to 69%. Same chocolate, same room, 1 cent versus 0. The gap in response wasn't gradual, it was a cliff. And when they forced subjects to stop and actually deliberate about the choice to slow down and think, the effect disappeared entirely. Which tells you something important about what free actually is. Not a rational calculation that got the math right, but an emotional override that kicks in before the calculation starts. The deliberate brain is simply bypassed. The response is automatic, and it runs before you have a chance to examine it. From an evolutionary standpoint, this is obvious in retrospect. In the ancestral environment, food that required zero energy to obtain, food that simply appeared, was an extraordinary event. Food in front of you with no hunt, no risk, no caloric expenditure required to acquire it meant you had hit the rarest possible jackpot. That signal, effortless surplus, right now, was assigned the highest possible priority your nervous system could give it. And in your modern brain, it still carries that exact same priority. The sheet cake costs you nothing. The conference lunch costs you nothing. The wedding appetizers cost you nothing. And each time, somewhere underneath the social awareness and the reasonable adult decision-making, your nervous system sends a quiet signal. Jackpot. Feast conditions. This moment is why we're here. Eat. Here's the mismatch, laid completely bare. Your brain built the feast response for a world where food was genuinely, unpredictably scarce. A world where surplus was temporary and could not be stored by any means your body didn't provide internally. A world where loading up today was the only rational hedge against not eating enough sometime in the next week. The algorithm was not just good. It was exactly right. It threaded your ancestral lineage through every famine and drought and long hungry winter that any of your ancestors ever survived. Every ancestor you have, going back as far as the evidence allows us to see, ate past full when they had the chance. That's part of why they're your ancestors. And now that same algorithm, unchanged, faithfully preserved, running exactly as written, is operating in a world where food is not scarce, where the surplus is not temporary, where the feast doesn't end because the next one starts tomorrow at breakfast, and then again at lunch, and then there's a catered meeting Thursday, and your nephew's birthday is Saturday, and the receptionist refills the candy bowl every Monday morning like clockwork. The mechanism your brain uses to regulate eating was calibrated in an environment where overeating was only physically possible occasionally, and undereating was a constant existential risk. You are now living in an environment where that ratio is completely reversed, and your brain has had approximately zero evolutionary time to process that reversal. Behaviorally significant human evolution operates on timescales of tens of thousands of years, minimum. The modern food environment in its current engineered form is roughly 70 years old. 60. If you're being generous, 200,000 years of eat everything you can when it costs you nothing. 70 years of the supermarket is always open, and also someone engineered the chips to be irresistible. That adaptation timeline does not work in your favor. What you are experiencing standing at the appetizer table at your cousin's wedding, already past full and reaching again, is not a character flaw. It is a fossil. A perfectly preserved behavioral fossil, running exactly as it was designed to run, in an environment it was never designed for. You are not broken. You are this very specific and slightly tragicomic way, too well adapted for a world that no longer exists. So the next time you catch yourself eating past full because someone set out a bowl of chips, or because the buffet is there and the food is free, or because it's your coworker's birthday and saying no to the cake somehow feels socially like a declaration of war, try to remember what's actually happening. You came back to that plate for the same reason your great-great-great-grandmother's great-great-grandmother ate past full at the fire 10,000 years ago. Because surplus is precious. Because winter comes. Because you don't know when the next kill arrives. Your nervous system is loyal to a world that no longer exists, and it is doing its loyal, faithful, well-intentioned best with information that is 200,000 years old and does not include the concept of a Wednesday Domino's deal. The sheet cake is not your enemy. Your brain is not broken. You are carrying, intact and fully operational, a survival tool that kept an entire lineage of human beings alive long enough to produce you. The tool just can't read a calendar. And maybe the most honest thing this video can offer you is this. Understanding why you do it doesn't make the poll disappear, but it does mean that the next time you eat past full at something free, you don't have to feel like a failure on top of it. You can feel like what you actually are, a magnificently over-engineered survivor in a world your body never saw coming. Here's your question for the comments, and I genuinely want to hear this. What is your specific free food kryptonite? The thing that appears at social events and bypasses every intention you showed up with? For a lot of people, it's a very specific thing. Not food in general, but one precise item. Tell me in the comments. The range of answers is always incredible. If you want to keep understanding why your brain and body do things that make no sense in the modern world, subscribe. We've got a lot more of this coming.